Friends, welcome back. How are we doing today? Welcome back as always to Continues to Tick, the channel where I show you a dividend portfolio unfold over time. And we leverage time on this channel. There's no rush. We know as dividend investors, we got a lot of time to pass. We got a lot of time to utilize. I was going to say kill, but you don't want to do that. You want to leverage this time. You want to utilize it as best as you can and have it work on your side and to your advantage. I mean, that is something that as a dividend investor, we do tend to recognize as an important component. And if you didn't know, I will tell you and I will remind you. And hopefully over time, you'll be able to see on this storyline of me with just one individual creating a dividend portfolio week by week, month by month, decade after decade. I'm going to continually be here as long as YouTube is here just to show you. But hopefully you can just see this storyline as one example of someone starting a dividend portfolio at the very beginning, and then over time, over decades, when they reach the age of 50 or so, it's substantial, it's significant, it is something that's remarkable at that point. I mean, you'll see we're only at about 65,000 total dividend portfolio at this time. This is after about 3 years, but we have a long way to go. So with that being said, friends, if you remember my last video, I'm going into a deep dive of my whole strategy right now. I'm not changing the fact that I'm being a dividend investor. That's a component of this all that's not changing. But from time to time, friends, as life continues to happen and unfold for you, things start to change, your mentality starts to change, you grow. I just call it growth. There will come moments in this life where you're going to have to make adjustments. I call it pivoting, adjusting and pivoting. And that's growth. At least that's how I tend to view it. Some of it can be negative, some of it can be positive. But the thing about this life, friends, it's that it's ever unfolding. It's forever changing. I mean, for me, the way I look at it, my father used to say the same thing. When he reached the age of 50, he said for him it was downhill at that point. And for me, I was still on the come up. And that was when he was 50. Well, my dad's, 68 now. So at that time, I was a young boy. Now I'm 28. So I am on the come up. I'm halfway or over halfway to 50. And he is, getting closer to 70 and then 80. And so on and so forth, as long as his health continues to keep him around, right? But that's the reality of life, is that, as you grow, other people grow as well. I mean, this life is continuous until the day that it's not. And because it's continuous, friends, I just also want to be here, apart from telling you a dividend story, just showing you that life will create change. It will create opportunities for you to have to make adjustments. And if you don't make these adjustments, unfortunately, you will stagnate, and unfortunately, you get left behind, or you just stop on your goals entirely. So with the dividend portfolio, friends, I always want you guys to understand and take one big takeaway, which is that it will require updating. It will require reevaluation from time to time. And that isn't failure. That doesn't mean that your initial plan didn't work. You see, I've grown a lot since I started this dividend portfolio. I had a lot of different goals. The main goal has remained the same, which is to try to retire by the age of 50. And in addition to that, be a dividend investor. Like, those things haven't changed. Those are big foundational, building blocks. And just from that point when I started to now, there's been some growth. There's been some life changes. There's been mental maturation. Things are forever changing. And that's just one big takeaway. I always just want you guys to understand. So with that said, going back to what I was saying, I get a little bit off course here, but last week we did part 1, right, of this deep dive. I was pretty honest and transparent. In order for us to come up with a plan, we have to know where we are. So with that, I exposed my debts. I think it's important to be transparent. It isn't always sunshine and rainbows. I've been showing this dividend portfolio for a long time on the surface, but underneath it, friends, I also have debts. I have things I need to pay off. And that is a reality of life, is that oftentimes what you see on the surface isn't what's underneath. So I just wanted to be transparent and let you guys know that if I'm really doing a deep dive, I want you guys to look at your debts. So that's why on my last week's video for part 1, we took a deep dive and we started with my debts. And if you want to look at that video, I'll put it as an attachment to this video. But for today's video, we're actually going now into part 2. And for part 2, we move on to the next phase. And then eventually after this phase, we'll get to part 3, and then maybe there'll be a part 4. But eventually the goal is to kind of do a pinnacle point of all of this and make one big video where I actually talk about how and actually identify my plan moving forward. But we'll get there eventually. But for today's video in part 2, I want to talk about my income and my goals and how I determine them. So hopefully it helps you to determine it for yourself. So starting with goals and income, friends. These are 3 things that I consider. And it's important when you're going to do a deep dive or a reevaluation of your strategy. It's important. We got to know where we are, and we got to know what tools we have at our disposal. And we also got to understand that as we walk this path, where do we want to walk to? What does this path look like on the way? Those things are important. And that's what knowing your income and knowing your goals do for you. But in order to identify these, friends, these are 3 things that I consider. This first one is how much do you want to obtain? I call this lifestyle. Lifestyle today, lifestyle in retirement, and we'll talk about it a little bit here. The second one, friends, is what is your level of work ethic, your hunger, and we'll talk about that too. And then for this third one, is it realistic? And I put in parentheses that income matters, and we'll talk about this as well. But friends, for this first one, when it comes to understanding what it is you want in any goal that you make, anything that you try to obtain, you got to understand. You have to have a clear picture. If you look off into the distance, you're not going to know what you're looking for if you don't know what it is that you're looking for, if you don't know what it is that you want. Same thing is when you go on a long road trip and you try to set your GPS. We don't just set no point that we're trying to get to, right? You'll end up nowhere. You identify where it is you want to go on your GPS. You see, hey, it's going to take about 4 hours. You prepare for this trip. If it's an overnight venture, you pack clothes. You make sure to get gas if it's a long road trip. You prepare for this because you know exactly what the end goal is going to be. And the same thing has to go for your dividend portfolio, aka also later, right, more clarity for your retirement. If you want to retire a certain way, you got to understand what that looks like. So for me, I know I want to live almost the same as if I'm living right now, working today in the day-to-day. I want to be able to spend about as much as I'm spending today in my retirement. I want my retirement to be that nest egg that people talk about. This whole time I spent, building this thing, and eventually when I get to retirement, I actually want to have the fruits of my labor, right? If that makes sense. So for me, I don't want to have less in retirement. So I actually want to work so I can maintain what I have today in retirement and actually probably have a better house, have a better car, have it all be a sum of all the work that I've put in and have it show, right? Like this whole time in the workforce right now, I'm building this house, right? I start with the foundation, I get the supplies I need, I decide the template of what I want this house to look like. By the time I actually get to retirement, I want to live in this house, right? For example, this is all metaphorically speaking, right? I want to live in this house. I want it to be the outcome of all the work that I've put in. That's what I want my lifestyle to look like. For some people, they may actually do a FIRE retirement. Maybe they need less in retirement, so they don't need much. They're okay with less and a more simple lifestyle. But for me, I know I want to travel. I know I want to have a nicer house. I know I want to have a nicer car. So in order to obtain these things, you need to know that these are the things you actually want. So then you can come up with a plan, a schematic to actually try to put yourself in a position to work towards getting that. So that is the first one, friends. So for this second one, right, just tying into that. So now we've discussed a little bit more. We got a better, clearer picture of what it is that we want, right, in our retirement. So now we got to put in the plan in place to get it. And a big thing with it, friends, is your work ethic, is your hunger. For me, if I want this type of lifestyle, which is about the same as me living today, if not better in retirement, that's going to require a lot of work, right? Just to be honest. And because of that, I have to continue to build myself up today to work up have the work ethic, have the discipline, have the hunger and the drive and the grit to push myself through my obstacles in the workforce, invest how I need to, save how I need to, live today how I need to, so I can live later in the future how I want to. This is all very important. Let's say your goal's bigger than the palette that you have, right? If I really want this huge lifestyle, if I want to live in Beverly Hills and I want to live in a $5 million home, but I have no means from now till then to get there. And on top of that, I don't have the work ethic to put into finding a job or creating the income necessary to live that life, right? So in that sense, there would be a disconnect. So what you're looking for here, friends, one thing I consider is you just don't want there to be a disconnect. You want there to be an alignment of the outcome of the lifestyle that you want in retirement with your current position today. And if you're not in that position today, you at least want to have a plan in place to get there. And a big component of it will be the work ethic and the hunger. The bigger the goal, the more work ethic, the more discipline, the higher the hunger needs to be in order for you to obtain it. If you want a more simple lifestyle in retirement where it actually steps off, it drops down, maybe the work ethic and the hunger, isn't necessary to that higher capacity to get that, because your means are going to be lower in retirement than they are today. So it's actually kind of taking a step off the gas, if that makes sense. Versus for me, I can't take my foot off the gas quite yet, because I know my life in retirement, I want it to be the same, if not slightly better, right, when I retire than it is compared to today. And then the final thing, friends, the third thing, I like to just be realistic with myself. So we talked about the work ethic, we talked about the hunger, we talked about that end goal that we want for retirement, right? We talked about how there has to be a connect there. And if they're disconnected, there's no plan in place, you're not going to get to that outcome. At that point, it just becomes an empty desire, right? Which is hurtful. It's hurtful to have an empty desire with no plan in place to obtain it, because then you'll actually never reach it. You'll always just live in wants and desires. And that actually hurts more when you can't even achieve it, right? It starts to hit the ego. It starts to hit us very deep inside. It makes you feel like a failure, and other things can come up. So for me, I like to just process my goal with the connection of the plan in place. And I like to ask myself, does it look realistic? And a big component of this, unfortunately or fortunately, you have to be honest, is the income, right? If I say I want to live a certain way in retirement, right? If I want to have a nicer house, a nicer car, I want to live the same and not step off my living lifestyle in retirement compared to when I was in the workforce. The one thing that's going to require is money. So how can I actually position myself to have a passive income that once I actually go to retire, I'm going to get this money start to come in, or maybe have a side hustle, one that I could see myself, continuing to do in retirement, so then I still get income. But the idea is you have to be realistic. You have to understand that the money is going to be something that is very important to achieve that end goal. In my position, I know I have to be realistic. That's why if I want that lifestyle today, I have to continue to plan this dividend portfolio. I have to continue to recognize if I need the pension or a 401k. I need to also invest in real estate. And I also need to find ways to increase my income. So just be honest with yourself, be realistic. Don't set yourself up for failure. For me, I like taking a base hit approach in terms of taking, a small goal, completing that, setting another small goal and completing that, and just base hit after base hit after base hit, knocking out these goals. And when I go to turn and look around and look back behind me, I've already made it quite a distance. And that's how I like to operate in this life. It's more of a safer approach, but now I'm starting to kind of work more on personal development, where my work ethic and my hunger and my drive and my confidence in myself to get goals accomplished has been increasing. So it makes me not riskier, but now I can set slightly bigger goals and achieve them, and then set a slightly bigger goal and then achieve it. Because me as a person, I'm setting a stronger foundation, if that makes sense. But that's another component to this all. I guess with this third one, just in summary, ask yourself, what lifestyle you want, the plan that you have in place, is it realistic to getting that outcome? But now moving forward still, friends, in this video, we've covered quite a bit so far, but hopefully here you're still with me. So now I want to actually combine all of this, and I actually want to be transparent with you and share with you my income and goals. Last time we talked about debts, But today we'll talk about income, and then we'll also get into some goals that I've set. And as far as the goals, I've broken them down into goals in my 20s, goals in my 30s, goals in my 40s. I didn't go further than that because my goal is right after the age of 49, at the age of 50, to actually be retired. And from that point on, it would be another stage of life, right? So at that point, maybe I'll talk about it in a future video, but I have to kind of talk about the plan to get there, because the goal would be right after that, and that'd be a goal achieved. So in that sense, there's not too much to talk about. I would have made it. So we'll talk about the goal to get there. But first, friends, like I said, you have to be realistic. What is your income potential? This is the tool. This is your shovel to getting that lifestyle that you want. If you're smart about how you have been in the workforce to get to retirement, the idea is to increase your income. I mean, just to be quite honest, we're currently living in a society, in a capitalistic nation, where if you're not making a lot, your lifestyle just decreases year by year by year. I mean, inflation is chopping away at your income, at your savings. And if you're not making quite a bit of money and you're not investing it on top of it, you're just getting left so behind. Every single year, every couple years, you're just getting chopped away at the potential. And it's hurtful to see, friends. I've only been in the workforce for 5 years or so now, and it's hurtful to watch. And it's hurtful to just understand that, the goal is to make more income. Because a lot of people don't do it, or they can't do it immediately. So it's hurtful to see. But friends, for me, my income potential, for those that know, you already know. I work as a registered nurse. My income is upward of $100,000. I live in the state of California. It's very common to be a nurse here in this state and make $100,000 or more. It's very common. I've been in the workforce for, like I said, almost 5 years. So I've been making upward of $100,000. At this point, I have a pretty good high-paying job, I'd say, working for the state of California. I'm making quite a bit, and I also get a pension on the back end. But because I get a pension, they take quite a bit out of my checks. So my take home, is definitely less because of the pension, but the pension is like a 401k, if that makes sense. But the point is, $100,000 at least is kind of what I'm making. And it's important to just recognize that, because that is my income potential. That is just me as an individual. Now, if I get together with a partner, which I'm currently with as well, you combine incomes and things start to look better. But I always like to do things individually, because you never know what can happen. Divorce happens, people separate. Don't fully rely on the other person. That can always come back and bite you later down the road. So whenever I do my math, you'll notice I do it as one individual, just myself, because I think it's important to always keep that individuality, for yourself and your partner for themselves, in this life. I always think that's important. And then from this, friends, like I said, some of it goes to the pension, straight directly there. So my take-home pay is roughly a month, $6,600. So moving forward still, friends, in the video, I talked about my income. Now I want to talk about my financial goals. And it's just one big one. I want to retire by the age of 50 with a nice lifestyle. And part of that, like I was sharing, is I want to have the house that I've always wanted. And I want to have the cars that I've always wanted. And on top of that, I've got to experience vacations. And I always want to continue to vacation and have money for that. And probably do so even more when I'm retired, because now I'm going to have more time. I want to be able to go out for longer periods of time and also vacation at the same tier, the same lifestyle in which I do it today, if not better. That is kind of my picture. That is my goal. I want to obtain that. So just sharing it with you all here. So now, in addition to the main goal, friends, I told you my retirement goal. I want to tell you some of the goals that I'm having for each decade of my life. I'm currently 28 years old, so I'm currently in my 20s. When I go to sit back and think about, my 20s, there are certain things that I want to accomplish. And these are a list of them. And I'm going to do one for my 20s, for my 30s, for my 40s. But as far as my 20s go, friends, I want to set up my foundation. What I mean by this is I want to get a job that pays me well. And then I really want to start to begin to think about setting myself up for retirement. And I think these are two important things that I've always wanted to do in my 20s. And I've slowly been chipping away at them. And I think I've been doing a decent job. The next one was always to create a dividend portfolio. Right? And I started one, which is good. And then one's one that I'm currently working on, but it was to pay off all my personal debts. I still have 2 years or so to go in my 20s, so I'm hoping I can pay off all my debts by this time, so that way going into my 30s, I'm already debt free. And then all the money is working for me at that point. I don't have anything really holding me back other than, my spending habits, which I think is important because in your 20s, you can leverage time. The more free money you have to invest, the more it compounds, right? The longer you have that money to invest for. And for this last one, friends, I want to build up my work ethic and work on personal development to accomplish my future tasks. This kind of goes along with the plan. Like, we all want things, but if I don't have the work ethic to continue to work and the drive and the hunger, I'm not going to accomplish those big future goals that I have for myself. So in order for me to accomplish that end goal, I need to become the person that can accomplish that end goal, if that makes sense. There's a difference between just wanting that end goal and becoming the person that deserves it. So for me, friends, I want to work really hard in my 20s so I become the person that deserves that end goal. That's what I'm working on. And that's what I mean by working up and building up my personal work ethic and my personal development, right? Me as a person, trying to become the best person that I can be. And then I could leverage that going into my 30s as the best person I can be, into my 40s as the best person I can be. Because as long as you don't get in your own way, friends, you can set goals and attain them. Because an important thing in this life that you're going to realize over time is that we just continually begin to get in our own way. And we get in our own way of our own goals. So we set these goals and then we self-sabotage. I'm trying to prevent all the self-sabotaging now in my 20s. That way when I go through this life, it's more seamless. I have a lot more confidence in myself. I think it's important. So friends, now in my 30s, what are some of my goals? Well, I want to buy my first home. I want to buy my second home, maybe later in my 30s, but still within this decade. And I also want to continue my dividend portfolio, continue to funnel it, hopefully funneling it at a higher pace than I'm currently, funneling it in. Hopefully by this point, I find ways to increase my income, which is another one of my goals, which then gives me more money to invest. And it just kind of exponentially grows here in my 30s. The way I look at it is my 20s, I was setting my foundation. In my 30s, I'm starting to build now on top of this foundation. And hopefully in my 20s, I was able to build a solid foundation. Because as you know, when you build a home, if there's any cracks in the foundation, if the foundation is uneven, it really damages the potential to build on top of it. And it really damages whatever you've built on top of it to not last as long. So I'm trying to be very careful, very meticulous in my 20s about how I do things. That way now when I get into my 30s, I'm starting to really build on top of this and exponentially, grow from this point on. I really want my 30s to be a growth phase, my 20s to have been a building phase going into my 40s, but I almost forgot here. I also wanted to have a viable side hustle in my 30s. So that's something that I also have as a goal for myself. I've been recently putting more time and energy into, something that I started on the side, which is like a male nurse mentor, side hustle. I'm not making any money off it for now, but, we'll see as time goes on what that turns out to be. But if it's not that, hopefully it's something else. Hopefully it's real estate, being a landlord, just trying to find a side hustle in my 30s. We're talking about our 40s. I still view 40s as a very young age. Some people have always said, even when they were younger, when you're in your 40s, you're getting old. I don't know. I just, for some reason, never have seen it to be old. I see people in their 60s and I still don't think that's old. I see people in their 70s and I'm like, that's really not old. I just don't feel like that's old. Some people, I've seen some really fit people in their 80s. So, 40s is still young to me. It was just a side comment because I thought about it. But in my 40s, friends, some of the goals that I have. So by this time, I want to have at least 3 rental properties, right? At least 3. I wanted to get 2 in my 30s and maybe get a 3rd now going into my 40s. So by the end of my 40s, right, I could be 49 years old. At the age of 49, I at least want to have 3 rental properties. And I think that's pretty realistic. It just depends. The idea is I want to have quality rental properties over quantity. So that's why I'm okay with having 3, by the time I go to retire. I also want to have reached at least $1 million mark in my dividend portfolio. And I'll highlight it here so you can see these. But I at least wanted to reach at least $1 million mark in my dividend portfolio. I've used the Dividend Hue Calc, calculator. And even based on my slowest investing strategy of $100 every single week, I should be able to hit this by this point in my life, just fine. But like we talk about, life has a way to make things happen. So I just want it to be a goal that by the age of 49, right when I'm going to retire, hopefully at the age of 50, I can at least have $1 million mark in my dividend portfolio. That has always been an end goal for me. Just open up my dividend app and see, bam, 7-figure portfolio, a dividend portfolio that's been working for me over time, dripping. That's just something that it's a desire. It's not an empty one because I have a plan in place, but still, it'd be a fun desire to reach and obtain. And for this next goal, friends, I want to have a flexible nursing job. So I would still see myself working as an RN. It's a very solid career. There's so many different avenues to which I can work in. I may never want to forever work in the prison setting, but hopefully by this point I have a more flexible job and one that allows me to make even more money than I currently make today. That continues to go with the plan right in my 30s of trying to increase my income. And then after this, friends, I would also want my side hustle to, at this point, to be a parent, and one that I enjoy, one that I've been cultivating over time, and now it's finally on its own also kind of paying dividends. Like, it's something that I can see myself even doing in retirement, one that I enjoy. It doesn't have to be a booming side hustle that's making a ton of money, but it's at least one that I would enjoy continuing to move forward. And hopefully by this point I've put enough energy into it that would be the case. That's just another goal for myself. And then continuing forward, another one of my goals is to pay off one of my houses as a fail-safe for early retirement, right? One of the things that people talk about is, have a paid off home, when you go to retire. And I think this part is very important because it can act as a fail-safe, right? You don't want a huge house mortgage when you go to retire, because if something happens in your dividend portfolio, if something happens in your 401k, if something just happens, right, and your income stream disappears, that could be a big problem, especially if you have this big mortgage dangling over your neck, right? So a big goal for me is right before I retire, I do want to have at least one of my 3 homes paid off. That way, regardless of whatever happens, I at least have one home I can get to and live in and be okay and ride out whatever hardships, come my way unexpectedly. So it's just like a fail safe, but I think it's important. One thing that would be, very mindful to do if you're going to retire early or just go to retire at all is have one house paid off. And this last one is actually the most important, I would say. Is to have a foundation, right, that is very clear for me to retire at the age of 50. It has to be very clear. Otherwise, I won't be able to retire, and I would decide not to retire that early. But I want it to be very clear. I want my dividend portfolio income to be clear. I want my 401k or a pension to provide me sufficient amount of money, later on in life when I need it. I want my real estate portfolio to be clear, knowing what passive income I get, how much mortgage I have left, and things like that. And I want my side business. If it's another source of income, I want that to be very clear as well. Is it one that I enjoy doing? Is it one that I see myself doing? Is it one that even makes me money? I also want my house to be paid off. Like I said, paying off my house takes a big load and stress off my shoulders going into retirement, taking off that mortgage that I would need to just pretty much survive, right? So having that house paid off. My point to this one is I just want it to be clear that I would be able to retire. Otherwise, I won't retire and I would just miss the mark. Maybe instead of retiring at 50, I retire at 52 or 55 or 57. I might prolong it. Life happens. And that's something I'm just going to have to process as time goes on. But I'm not old enough to project that quite yet. I'm only 28 years old. I got a long way to go. As time goes on, we'll reevaluate and we'll see realistically how this plan starts to formulate over time, what some of these goals are realistic over time and which ones aren't. Time tells all. That's what I like to say. Time tells all. It tells you everything you did right. It tells you everything you did wrong. And sometimes things happen unexpectedly, things that you don't see coming. I may, for example, not even be here for any of this to matter. Who knows? But I think it's still important and mindful to plan ahead and think ahead. But that's enough of this, friends. These are just some goals that I wanted to break down and share with you. Pretty in-depth to a point, kind of superficial still, but I think it's important, especially when we get further in this series here, and I kind of go to formulate my plan with you guys and tell you at the very end what my plan is moving forward. And take note, these plans may only be for a year or so, but I think it's important to do this every so often, probably yearly, to be honest. So it's fun. It's fun to do this. We'll get to an actual part that a lot of you guys actually think matters the most because we're dividend investors, right? It's to see an actual dividend portfolio grow over time. That's the whole point of this series on Continues to Tick. And to be honest, the markets haven't been very exciting. They've been a little boring, recently. Here we are all time at 65,000, which isn't too much different than where we were last time. The markets are continuing to just kind of go back and forth, but overall, they've been having a downward trend, unfortunately. But $65,209 is where we're currently at, with an all-time return of 11.82% and a gain of $4,560. And I always like to zoom in here, because all time, here we are, still in the green, $299, and I'll take it. But because we're dividend investors, right, we get $4,261 all time, calculated into our return. Many people's portfolios might actually be in the red for the whole year or just in general, but we continue to have gone income because we're a dividend investor. And just looking at our last month's performance, it hasn't been pretty. We're transparent here. It's down 5.30%, which is a negative $3,627, friends. For the last week, I think it's been no, it's not flat. It's pretty negative. Minus 2.35%, minus $1,565. I think the one that I was referring to was the year to date. The year to date was relatively flat, and it's 0.82% for the year negative, and it's down $536. And if you look, friends, we got a slight cushion. We're really only down $500 for the year, but that's because we've earned dividends along the way. So the earned dividends have combated some of this negative market movement. So it's only a negative for the year because we're a dividend investor of $500. So take a look at that math there. And then just out of curiosity, friends, let's look at our all-time return here once again, and let's look at our best gainers. So tech continues to be the best gainer at 136.61%, followed by energy at 89.18%, and financials. And if I had to guess, yep, real estate is still in the bottom, minus 20%, and then healthcare is minus 25%. So not too surprising for real estate. Healthcare kind of fluctuates. It has its moments. It does good and bad. And just before I wrap up, let me show you guys some activity here, just to give you guys a little bit of motivation at the very end. This is why I'm a dividend investor, and this is why I also encourage you to be a dividend investor. October 16th, 13th, 12th, these are all our dividend payouts in the green here. Medtronic, $12, $8, Essex, $16, Philip Morris, $10, so on and so forth. Avalon Bay Communities, $15. And of course, just to be transparent, even more, here are my deposits. They happen weekly, every Friday, $100, $100, and $100, and so on and so forth. But friends, this journey is worth it. At the very end of all of this, friends, I just want you guys to understand that this strategy is worth it. It is just one of many, but it is worth it. If you decided on dividends, friends, you decided to become a dividend investor, I'm hoping that over time this is helpful. It's a storyline unfolding in real time, so it's not super exciting, but if you're here for the ride, friends, whether you've joined at any point of this journey, hopefully you can just take away the fact that this is worth it. It's a viable strategy, and it does help for retirement. It does help to fluff up that passive income pillow that we all know you want, we all know I want. In retirement, it will help. And as always, friends, I'm going to end the video here before I continue to lose my voice. I will see you guys in about 2 weeks. That's our frequency here. But as always, just continue, friends, continue to invest. I'll see you on the next one. And as always, take care.